right. Hey, thank you so much, everybody, for showing up tonight. I know it's a beautiful Minnesota summer night. We don't get a whole lot of those, so appreciate you making the trek out here. We're excited to talk about this topic. I know we've had quite a few conversations over the months about this. So we're excited to share with you about this whole person interviewing, give you some tips on how to have better conversations with candidates. But to start things off with, I'm John Arnold. I'm one of the managing partners at Celarity. I've been there for about 13 or 14 years. Through the course of being there, we've placed about 5,000-ish candidates. I've probably been in hundreds of interviews myself. I'm definitely not an expert though, but I feel like I can help guide this conversation at least. I'm always learning, so love to share the tips with you tonight. Gina?
Yes, it's so nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So I'm the chosen leader of human kindness. That is a self-appointed title. And that's really for twofold. One, I want to keep myself honest. So if I'm not being kind and if I'm not being a leader, I give you all permission to call me out on that. And so I recently started a business called People Possibility with a partner who happens to be in the room. So Autumn is over there. Make sure you get a chance to say hi to her. And we have come together to really serve companies in a new, different, better way. We want to be able to help with culture and coaching and really embody the whole human spirit in the workplace. So we've all had this upending in our society called COVID-19, where we've been able to really kind of pull the rug up and see all of the stuff that's underneath. And we really want to acknowledge what is all there that makes us a human being. We don't want to say, okay, just, put that to the side. So John and I have had lots of really good conversations about what that looks like, and we wanted to share it with all of you.
Yeah, so we can get started, and I wanted to pull out a few stats here just to say how important it is for your hiring process and making the right hires. So we found a stat that 74% of companies reported that they have made a bad hire recently. I would say that's probably 100% because we all make mistakes, and it's not just the company that's making the hiring decision, it's also the candidate making a decision, and they might not have made a fully informed decision as well. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But also a bad hire can also cost up to $17,000 on average for a company.
It was interesting. I was looking at some of my past companies as well, and one that shall remain nameless because I have a history of some of the organizations that I've worked with. However, some of their team members did not stay long term, so they had turnover, and every year the company would lose about 50% of their staff. So I did the numbers on a company of about 500, let's just give or take, and I lowered the dollar amount to 10,000 because math, to keep it easy. And I was like, wow, that's a $2 million number. So I also don't think that we're taking the time to recognize those intangible dollars that are flying out the door because we're not taking enough time in this process when we're really starting the process to say, are we going to work together long term or not? And
a lot of the hiring managers, it's not their number one job to hire. It's their third or fourth job, and they don't do it all the time. So that's why we're here to share some tips with you all, and we can kind of get started. So the topic is whole person interviewing. So let's get into that. What is it? And we'll define it, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so whole person interviewing is really looking at the whole person, being human-centric and really understanding the unique talents that someone's bringing to the table. So I like to call it, we're looking for the map of the person. So it's the mindset, attitude, and passion. So we're really good at what I would call something behavioral-based interviewing, right? Who has had a behavioral-based interviewing? Everyone should probably raise their hands because typically that's the type of interview style that is going to look for skill set. What have you done? Have you done it well? Can you do it again? Right? Check those boxes. And really, we want to be able to look for the unique talents, the unique capabilities that someone can bring to the work environment. And that might be a little bit under the surface, looking at what, again, the map is, the mindset, attitude, and passion.
Yeah, and it's about having more of a conversation that's not transactional, right? It's not a one-sided conversation. It's not tell me about this, how did you do this? It's more of a conversation about sharing what the situation is, being transparent, and then kind of coming to that decision together and choosing to work together, right?
Exactly. So it's really the start of an ongoing relationship. And I don't know all about you. How many of you have relationships where you don't communicate at all? Or we don't ask any questions? It's complicated, right? So when you go into an interview, have you all felt like you've been on the spot or like you're about to be grilled? Okay, so John, I like nearly fell off my chair the other day when we were like talking about how the session was gonna go. And what did you say, John?
Yeah, so we should be grilling food and not people. So.
Yeah. Grilling food, not people. So that's the quote of the century, I think, when it comes to interviewing candidates. How can it be a two-way conversation? How can we really come together and talk about the transformation of this process of really pairing an employer with an employee and not be transactional? You know, we talk about who whole person interviewing is really good for. And it's really good for those companies who want to have a long-term asset with their organization that's going to add incremental value over the long term. I was talking with one of the people in the audience how, you know, she has her 3-year anniversary tomorrow. And I was like, oh, okay, good, yay, excited. And also when someone hits the 3 to 5 year mark, they say, oh, is this company, you know, really talking the talk and walking the walk? And are they utilizing their values and do the values mesh? And that's when people look for a new opportunity. So we want, through the whole person interviewing process, is to find those candidates that want to stay with us for more than 3 to 5 years. If it's something where you want someone to just transact, do behavioral based interviewing. I'm sure that will figure out the process and be good enough.
Yeah.
But we want better than that.
Yeah, and every role is a little bit different too, right? I mean, if you're just hiring somebody for maybe a consulting thing for a few months, I mean, you probably don't need to do an entire in-depth conversation like we're talking about. It's nice, right? But maybe behavioral-based interviewing is perfect for that because you just want to know about the skills, what kind of situations did you do with it in the past, that kind of stuff, right? But if we're talking 3 to 5 years, people's jobs aren't the same after 3 to 5 years. Things change, processes change, tools change. So that's what we're trying to get at, is you have to think beyond just, hey, what did you do lately? Right. Yeah,
and about the adaptability, flexibility, I think we've all had to be able to leverage some of those strengths and skills within inside of us.
Yeah. And we were saying too, so who is this for, right? Like, is it for just certain HR members, or who would you recommend like this approach for?
Yeah, so the whole person interviewing approach actually can be done at any point in the organization. So if you're a new startup organization and you, let's say, have a team of 20, you can do it for that size of group. If you're in a larger company and you have an HR team, it might be something where you want to influence them depending on what you're currently doing today. So you can do it within a team, or you can partner with the HR representatives that you have to say, you know, how are we going about selecting talent, especially if you're a hiring manager. So that's one of the interesting things. How many hiring managers do we have here today? You get to hire people. And how many of you have been trained? So I think that's one of the interesting things too, is that we actually expect people to go out and hire people, which is a really key component of the job, and to bring people into your company. So if you're going to allow a bunch of strangers into your house, I would hope that you have a way to qualify who those strangers are before you let them into your house. So I like to talk in analogies. So that's really, you know, we're building a house. We are, you know, inviting people into this really great, hopefully, party that we want to be with them for a long time. So how do we really formulate that relationship and be successful? So it can start anywhere with anyone. It's really about having the dialogue and the conversation. Yeah, and I love that it doesn't have to be a big initiative at the company. You can have the power yourself to just go out and start doing this for your team. And we'll get in, it's more powerful to have collaboration with others. So we'll get to that right now, because we've been talking about what it is and who's it for. So let's talk about what it is and how to implement it, right? Yeah. So how would you recommend going about implementing this? Well, so one of the things that I want to do is take a step back, because as we look at organizations that might want to start really engaging the whole person and having the dialogue with candidates, is to say, where's our culture at today? So really do an honest assessment of where the company is currently at, and where are the skills currently on the team, and what skills do you have as gaps, or what competencies do you want to add to the team? So I would do more of an assessment on the overall culture, because you want to really know who you are and have confidence with who you are and the team that you are, so that you can bring in and attract someone that also would be a good fit for the team. Yep. Or the larger company. I love starting there, because a lot of people will just start the conversation with making a hire of, I'm overwhelmed, right? I need somebody to help me. Okay, I'll put together a job description. What do you want to put in the job description? Well, the stuff I don't really want to do. Like, right? Isn't that kind of basically how it goes? Or maybe just someone who can do it better than you or something like that.
So what I like about this is that when you take a step back and you assess the team, you're looking at what do you really need as far as what are people bringing each day to the company. I know at Celarity, we use a few different tools for assessing the team, and it's just good to use a few different tools. One is a good thing to start with. It can be overwhelming if you're trying to implement a lot of different tools, but one that we did this last year that we were talking about that really opened our eyes, especially on a leadership level, is this DISC assessment. Anybody familiar with DISC? Oh, a lot of people. Yeah. Awesome. So what we found out by doing this assessment, and this was right before we made a key hire, which was Jamie, who helped put together this beautiful event. Thank you, Jamie. We found out that everyone on our leadership team were drivers. So we had a lot of ideas and a lot of stuff that we were taking on constantly.
And no one that wanted to execute it.
And not a lot of follow-through support and execution. So once we realized that when we were going through interviewing Jamie, it was like a group consensus, like, wow, we need to add this to our team. So it wasn't about trying to find someone to fit our culture. It was, wow, we need to add to our culture.
Yeah, so another thing that you called out, John, is in that assessment process, when you can find out what you have or what you need, and if you're doing an assessment like DISC or StrengthsFinder, there's numerous ways that you can assess your team, whatever you actually have value in from a senior leadership team. From a support perspective, I would lean into that one. So then the other thing too is that you can actually start to brand your company in a new, different way to attract those candidates to you. So then, John, that's a really great example is, how can you share that you're doing the DISC with your employees, and are your employees also sharing that? And so when someone wants to work for Celarity, they can say, oh, wow, they care about me. They want to know about my whole person. They want to know about my personality. These are important things at this company. It also will attract those candidates to you as well.
Yeah, that was another funny thing that we're talking about is these days, the interview really starts before they apply. People always are now looking at your LinkedIn as a hiring manager, seeing what you're posting about. So you had that great idea about sharing what your team's about. So people can see that. And they're kind of self-selecting, like, oh, I want to be a part of that. It looks like they're doing DISC assessments. It looks like they value XYZ. So it's important to even start before that, to share a lot about, what your team's about, what you're about, just to get that out there.
Well, and you also, another piece too is if you have guiding principles or values that are a part of your organization, how do you pull those into the interview process as well? So you were sharing that you recently made a hire as well, and you talked about those values. Do you want to share that experience too?
Yeah, so we like to ask a question in all of our interviews. One of our values is passionate about your role. So we always like to ask, what are you passionate about? So it doesn't have to be overly complicated. If that's one of your values, you can just ask somebody what you're passionate about. And what I like to hear for in those conversations, it could be anything. I really don't care what they're passionate about. I just want somebody who's passionate, because then they can apply that to a lot of different things, right? We're always learning, picking up new stuff. So that's what I asked Allison, who's one of our other marketing hires. And I remember her answer because it was a couple of months ago, but really into books, really into reading. And it's like, you don't just leave it at that. I'm like, all right, well, what do you like to read? She listed off so many books, so many different things she was into.
And you're going to go read some of those, John?
I think there might have been one of them that was an overlap, but of one we read the same one. Yeah, okay. But that's just kind of stuff you look for. So it doesn't have to be overly complicated, right? You assess your values, skills. What other stuff should you try to assess before going to the next step?
The competencies, and really I think it's how do you get to the mindset, and you talked about passion and then attitude. So if someone has overcome an obstacle, how did they overcome that obstacle? What were the tools and resources that they leveraged? So we want to really hire resilient people that are going to be able to problem solve and figure out, or at least take a stab at it. I mean, I'd rather have someone go and try to do something and maybe fail or say, oops, I might not have done that the wrong way, but they took the initiative. Yeah. So it's really assessing what are those qualities that you want on your team.
Yeah, so you can kind of start to see how these questions we're talking about are more of conversation questions. It's not, tell me about how you did this, right?
Tell me about a time.
Yeah, tell me about a time you did this, right? So that's why we're talking about this. So we've assessed everything. We've identified the team,
Maybe
needs.
There's some gaps.
We've identified some gaps. Now we can get the job description together. We attracted somebody to come talk to us about the role. what's a powerful question? How do we start that interview process?
Right. So I think what's interesting in the interview process today is we're not asking powerful questions. So there's a whole list of them that we're going to provide to you as an additional kind of takeaway. My biggest question is that, from a powerful question perspective, it's going a little bit deeper. So it's asking someone, what are you unwilling to change? Right? So that's going to make someone dig a little bit deeper. I'm not willing to change my risk tolerance. Like, I'm going to be bold and I'm going to tell you what I think. And if you like me, you like me. And if you don't like me, you don't like me. So that's something that I'm unwilling to change. So if you ask a candidate that, it would be interesting to see what sort of response you get and how that fits within your culture. So there's a lot of ways to ask powerful questions. I'm curious, though, from an audience perspective, what would be a powerful question in an interview that you would want to be asked? So a little audience participation. Yes.
What's the water cooler talk about?
Ooh, what's the water cooler talk about you?
Like, what do people say about you?
Yeah.
And it might be positive, it might be not so positive, but what is it?
That's great.
Yeah, that's good.
What other powerful question would you want to be asked of you in an interview?
I've like the one, you're driving down the road and there's a billboard with your name on it and there's adjectives around it to describe you. What would those adjectives be?
That's great. So if you're driving down the freeway, billboard, adjectives with your name, what would those adjectives be? That's great. So guess what? We don't want to ask what are your, top 3 strengths and what are your 3 opportunities. So we want to be more creative than that. And you could even ask someone, how does your creativity come alive in your work or personal life? One of the things that I like to ask is, what in this life do you still want to do? Because maybe that somehow relates to the job. Maybe they're there for 3 to 5 years to gain the skills so that they can go off and do that next thing. Because we're constantly all evolving. Any other powerful questions in the audience? Those are some good ones. Do you have,
What part of your story are you most proud of?
what part of your story are you most proud of? Do you see how that doesn't feel like a behavioral-based interview question?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's so open-ended that you could get a whole host of answers that's going to tell you and give you a little bit of a glimpse. The other one might be, what is your superpower? What's something really unique about you that could be used for work? Tell me something unique that you're never going to use at work. And something that I'd probably share is I'm a great vocalist. I love to sing, but I'm never going to do that at work.
Do it.
What? No.
We're gonna
So
sing the rest of this presentation.
I knew if I said that, someone was going to call me on it. What if I share afterwards if you'd like to know? So it's one of those things where, John, even before we got up here, asked, do you have a preference for the side that we sit on? I said, oh my gosh, yes, thank you. My left neck really bothers me. So if I could sit on your left, that would be great. So it's also showing compassion and empathy from a leadership perspective. It's those little touches. Yeah, we're getting some snaps in the audience.
Well, what I like too is that every single question that you guys brought up in the audience, everyone had that moment of like, oh, how would I answer that? Like, it was kind of like a fun thing to go through your mind. You can tell that conversation is going to be, one, not only more fun to have with a candidate, 2, you get to actually know them a lot more. 3, in this tough hiring environment, they're going to be excited to want to talk to you and work with you if you treat them that way versus grilling them with behavioral-based questions. So,
and we all want to be treated that way. We want to really get to know the human being that's showing up at work, don't we? Oh, great stat, since we were talking and throwing out some stats earlier. 90,000 hours is what you spend at work in your lifetime. So that's a third of your life. The other third is spent sleeping. And then the third part of the third is personal enjoyment. So you're spending a lot of time at work. So we really want to, I think, work with great people.
yeah, for sure. And I think that kind of brought up a good point too. We were talking as well about the questions can be framed in a way to really be transparent with people too. And it's always good. I know that we talked about this stuff is a lot to get going, right? You want to tell candidates you're excited, you're doing all these changes, like come be a part of like all these new things we're doing. That actually might not be a great thing because you might be overselling a situation, you might be overselling a role. So we just wanted to make sure we made it a good tip for everybody to be as transparent as possible about what the current situation is, what the role is about, seeing if it's a fit or not. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I was just going to say it's wasting people's time, right? So if you really want to know what the compensation is, ask about the compensation. If you really want to know what the culture is like, ask about the culture. I think that both parties, whether it's the employer or the employee, I think it's this mutually beneficial partnership that we're trying to gain. So I want to work with people long term. My last organization I was with for 10 years. I never thought I was going to be there that long. And it's because I really hung my hat on trust, transparency, and authenticity. That's how I showed up. And I feel like I was a really good mirror to the rest of the organization because then I also really asked for trust, transparency, and authenticity back from others that I was working with.
Yeah. And also, I know we can get stuck into, if you really like somebody, you can kind of get into a selling mode as an interviewer. And that's where I was kind of getting at too, is that you got to be careful with that. Because if they come in, you're overselling it, they come in, it's not a fit, it might work out for the first few months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year, but after a while, it's not going to be a fit long term if you don't know what their values are, being realistic about what they want to do long term, and all of that kind of stuff.
It's really an opportunity for the candidate to shine. The candidate should be doing most of the talking in the interview process. And we even had a candidate that wanted to know where they were going to sit in the company. So they knew that it was a new position. We had a cubicle ready and waiting. This prior to COVID. And we typically didn't walk people around the office from a candidate perspective. And because that candidate asked, we're like, oh, well, sure, we can do that. Like, let's go show you where you're going to sit. That was really important to the candidate. So it's about being flexible in the process. And you're right, not overselling.
Yeah, and you're not in it by yourself too. So leaving this meeting, right, what tip would you give everybody here, like, to go forward?
Well, the word that comes up for me is collaborate. So we are all in partnership with each other. We all want top places to work and best places to work. We really care about humans. Otherwise, I don't think you would have shown up tonight. So thank you for that. And I would say Celarity is a really great business partner, people possibility. We'd be more than happy to help you with your hiring processes and helping you get really great talent on your team that's going to be there long term. I know that Autumn and I really care about people and wanting to lift others up so that everyone can be successful. If we're not successful, you're not successful, and vice versa. So I think collaborate. And Celarity being a really great business partner, I think that there's a blog post that's going to follow this that will have amazing resources. Yeah. So for example, if you're not sure where to start with assessments, we're going to give you some places to go look at assessments.
Assessment suggestions.
If you're not sure how to ask powerful questions, we'll provide some powerful questions for y'all to start priming the well, priming the pump.
Yeah. So we'll email that out to all the attendees here afterwards. And then also something that came to mind too that I remember from our conversation a few weeks ago was a great idea to collaborate with the people on your team already. Ask them what questions they wish you would have asked during the interview. Or maybe they have some questions that they want, if they're not able to be in the interview with you, to ask that's important for them on the team. So just involve others. You don't have to do it alone. It's not heavy lifting by yourself as a hiring manager.
Yeah, especially if you've recently brought a candidate in like Allison or Jamie to gain their feedback. So I also think it's an iterative process. It's never maybe perfected or right 100% of the time. I think you really have to also assess your culture and the people that are in it so that you can continue to get better and aim for that best candidate possible.
Yeah, because it's a process. You're not going to be perfect. You'll still make bad hiring decisions. Candidates will still make bad decisions accepting jobs, but it's a process. The goal is you just get better and you have less of those errors. So we wanted to open up to you all, make sure we answer questions and hear from you. So what kind of questions do you have about this topic?
What happens when you have an amazing manager but a terrible interviewer?
Okay, so amazing manager, terrible interviewer. Are there two different people?
Sorry,
amazing manager, terrible interview. Okay, so that's real life. Yeah. So my guidance would be is don't have that person interview alone. Well, first of all, I would make sure that they have training and there's alignment and clarity for what the goal of the process is, right? So the more that we can talk and support each other, the better that will be. And then to not have that person interview alone. So I tend to do two interviewers with the candidate, or have multiple sessions. I wouldn't have that person interview alone. And what sort of honest conversation has happened with that person to really be from a place of support. I think that our responsibility is to support those leaders that may or may not have the talent or skills from an interviewing perspective. John, what would you say?
Well, it may not be their number one thing they're doing all the time, like we talked about. So if you are able to join them, I always recommend two people as well on the interviewing side, because one person should be taking notes really, and the other person kind of leading the conversation. But if you're able to do that and they're open to constructive feedback, I would sit in the interview with them and write some notes down and say, hey, I feel like we got hung up there. I feel like you were overselling there. I feel like you were grilling them there. Just gotta be open and honest with that feedback.
And we're gonna hear different things.
Oh yeah, that too.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So John has the opportunity to say something if we're interviewing, and I have the opportunity to say something. So we actually get to dialogue and have that feedback too. Mm-hmm. So I always find that there's benefit in having more people at the table.
Yeah, imagine, because we're talking about having real conversations with candidates, it makes it even harder if you're taking notes, having real conversation with a person. Like you wouldn't go have coffee with a friend and sit there with a notebook and be like, oh yeah, very important thing. Like you want to be invested in the conversation. So that's another reason why we recommend another person.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Do you just rely heavily on the background of the candidate to determine job skill if you're asking questions like, what superpower do you want? Because that to me doesn't really tell me if they can actually do the job or have the experience to do it. So you just relying on strictly their resume then? Or what's the tie-in, I guess, there, especially like for a new grad? I don't know.
Yeah. I think and that's a really great point, is when you're interviewing, especially from a new grad perspective, they might not have a lot to draw on. So I think that there's a couple of things. I don't want to throw behavioral-based interviewing out the door. I think that it's really looking at what is the most appropriate for the given context, the situation. Clearly, you want to be able to ask the same questions to each candidate in that candidate pool, right? We're not going to break a bunch of HR rules. However, what I would guide is with the behavioral-based interview questions, there's still even a shift with the powerful questions that will give you to focus on the obstacle of the question so that you can get to some of that skill item without what I would call leading the witness. So if you ask, okay, let's say someone was a server when they were in college, but they don't have a lot of other experience. I don't want to ask them, tell me about a time you satisfied a customer, right? Because they're just going to tell me a happy ending story, which I don't necessarily, that might not get me to what I really want. I want to know, tell me a time you served an upset customer. Then they can go 101 different ways about how they ended up, really satisfying the customer, but maybe the customer still left angry. I want to know what steps they went through to try to overcome that obstacle. Mm-hmm. That's going to tell me a lot about their, ingenuity, the tools that they went through to try to overcome that.
Well, and what I'm also thinking is interesting, is it more important that they have the experience or they fit the culture? What's more important to your organization? And so that's also the picture that I'm weighing in my head. What is more important? Depends on the leader, I suppose.
Depends on the role too, right? Yeah. If it's an industry, because you can't hire anyone to be a doctor, right? They need to go to school and do all the training and all that stuff.
We're assuming that's all happened, right?
Yes.
Depending on the technical, So what your question was though, is it skill and experience versus culture fit, right? And I think that's a really great dialogue to go back to your organizations and really ask, what is it that we're aligned with and have clarity around? I would rather hire for mindset, attitude, and passion over skill set. I think that anyone can learn anything, and I think we have a really big bias in our country of you have to have been there, done that. So if I'm a director in HR, I can only get another director in HR job. No one's going to hire me for a VP job. So there's lots of, I think, opportunities. Or guess what? I tried to go into the nonprofit world. I didn't get looked at because I've only been in corporate. I've never been a nonprofit. So I think there's biases that are inherent to our interviewing styles already. So how do we shift that and have the whole person at least have an opportunity to show up? So thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Appreciate it.